the Everything But Politics podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Everything But Politics podcast. We are incredibly excited to have Manuela Seve joining us today. Manuela is from Brazil, graduated from Stanford University, has an extensive background in tech, and is currently the CEO and co-founder at Alpha.io. She was also elected as one of the most 100 influential Latinos in the world. Manuela, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it really is. So I mentioned that tech background here. Obviously, being from Brazil, I've never been to Brazil personally, but what is the tech scene down in Brazil, and how did you kind of find yourself in that scene?
So I haven't lived in Brazil for almost 10 years, and
Okay.
I grew up between New York and Rio, luckily. Because, I feel like I wouldn't call it nascent, but I would say that it is definitely skewed and that there is a lot less opportunity for minorities and for, female founders than over here. And there's a huge kind of like movement of taking companies that, have already succeeded offshore and just kind of like making that business model Latin American friendly. So I'm not saying that there's no innovation, but it's definitely a lot, further behind versus, the US.
And I mean, at what point, obviously you said you've been here for a decade now. What led you to making the move?
I grew up between New York and Rio, so I've kind of like always been back and forth. My dad was in New York and I was in Rio with my mom, but I was always kind of like in between both and spending summers and winters in the US. And when I was younger, I moved right after graduating high school. My dad had a health complication and I ended up coming to kind of like help out. Then I ended up going back to Brazil for a couple of years, and I quickly realized that my life was not going to be there just for the things that I wanted to accomplish. And kind of like it was a natural move.
And for our listeners who are kind of unaware of what you do, how can you best simplify it?
So sure, Alpha.io is a fan engagement solution. So we connect people, content, and experiences through a best-in-class loyalty solution on the blockchain. And our clients include sports teams, beverage brands, and essentially what we do is we're able, through our kind of like two main products underneath the loyalty suite, the Passport, which is a ready-made scavenger hunt product, and the Fingerprint, which is a basically an identity solution within that community where we can know where that client has a great engaged with the physical product, if he's attended events and all of that. So we act as not only an on-ramp solution so that brands can create customer loyalty from any touch point from the given product, be it a QR code on the physical product, be an interaction at a retailer, be it a POS integration. But we also allow for these brands to gamify that experience and to allow them to grant rewards to their most active fans and create special experiences.
Wait, so Manuel, I have so many questions about what you guys are building at Alpha A, but I want to go back to, the point in time where you kind of discovered Web3 and we're like, okay, there's like a market for this. Like I'm gonna really dive into this Web3 thing and see what we could do here.
Yeah, for sure. So that was almost 10 years ago. We were running at the time our first company, which was an art licensing operation. And I picked up a book called Blockchain for Dummies, which was the first blockchain book out there. It was about Hyperledger, a Microsoft blockchain that doesn't even exist anymore. But just by looking at it, we knew that, blockchain was going to change the way that we did everything. Not just the way that, we purchased art at the time or interacted with collectibles, but mostly the way that people organize and the way the communities are built. And so that kind of like set the groundwork for what is Alpha.io. And, we started coding as a solution for authentication for physical artwork. And I used to play around at the time and say that people were going to say that the artwork was like the books on Amazon for us. And people laughed and thought it was really funny. But now, people are like, oh my God, you were actually onto something.
And why do you say that you realized blockchain was gonna, change everything? What about it gave you that realization?
A lot of different things, right? So if you think of like collectibles, for example, right, there's a massive issue right now in terms of provenance, authenticity, and proving that something actually was made by someone. If we kind of like relate that to Gen AI, right? Like right now, all of these libraries are being used, and we have no idea what sources of information are being put into that system. So we know that there's going to be massive copyright lawsuits coming down the line in terms of, artists that are already finding entire passages of their work being created by ChatGPT and all of that. So blockchain actually has the capacity to track content and to understand how it is being used and to compensate creators through physical royalties for their, work actually being used in IP. So that's kind of like just a small kind of like example, but obviously like thinking of how a database is easy to uh tamper with versus a ledger which is attached to a physical asset or to anything which holds its entire history in one place.
Well, let's say I think a year or two ago, I mean, Web3 was blowing up. You had people who didn't know anything getting involved because maybe they saw a quick money grab, and then it kind of slowed down, right? When do you expect it to like kind of like really be more like normal and everyday people using it?
So it didn't really kind of slow down. Like
Mhm.
what happened was there was a massive fraud in the ecosystem with FTX, and
Okay.
Sam Bankman-Fried stole $11 billion. So
Crazy.
that, was pretty much like our Enron moment. And a lot of people kind of like in the sector were already asking for more regulation, already asking for clearer rules so that, we could get to mass adoption. But looking at cycles of innovation, and, I can send you guys a bunch of studies around this. Usually technology cycles take 12 years from, the moment where they go into play to kind of like when they hit mass adoption. And 2024, which is this year, is actually the year that blockchain is supposed to hit mass adoption. So I think this year we're already going to see a lot of changes. We are already seeing a lot of bigger use cases, which are not just like, uh, traditional, the way that the people used to think of NFTs, which were the digital JPEG rug pools that, you're referring to. But,
Mhm.
fan engagement solutions, authentication solutions, obviously crypto as a payment solution. So if you don't own any crypto, if you don't own any Bitcoin, if you don't own any ETH, now would be definitely a very, very good time to start buying some, because it is literally a hedge against the banks and the traditional kind of like financial ecosystem that we know hasn't been working for a while.
And obviously, like Bitcoin is one of like the most popular ones. What are some other coins that could be potentially as big as Bitcoin to be used in the future?
I think the most valuable ecosystem is Ethereum, due to kind of like how it is on proof of stake versus Bitcoin that is on proof of work. It's just a, faster and less clunky ecosystem. And I would look at any coins that are EVM compatible and are true ETH layer twos, meaning that they are side chains that run on Ethereum infrastructure. We run on Lightlink. We've developed on Polygon before. Polkadot's done a great job. Like there's a lot of like big ecosystems that are getting a lot of projects on there. But I would definitely say Ethereum and Bitcoin are your chief kind of like safe bets in the space.
And a question I have for you regarding, Bitcoin or not Bitcoin as much, but Ethereum as a currency. So obviously with the US dollar, they could just continue to print more and more. And obviously you have Bitcoin, which is capped at 21 million. For Ethereum, is there a world where they could just keep creating more Ethereum similar to how they do the US dollar?
It would be unlikely, just in terms of kind of like how the block generators are, but Bitcoin is inflation protected because of the halving cycles, as you pointed out so well. And there's one coming up in April, so something to keep an eye out.
There's
Interesting.
what's coming out in April?
A Bitcoin halving cycle when the amount of Bitcoin minted is cut in half.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to something else we just recently mentioned which was the SBF FTX fraud, just that whole mess. Was that how did that, obviously you weren't involved or know anything about it from an insider perspective, but how was that so how did no one really catch on to that until it was like too late, if you will?
Well, Sam was the second largest donor of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
That
So
really
yeah.
does. Change thing.
Yeah, okay. I understand. Um, yeah, no, but it is fascinating in terms of, all the people, the Tom Brady's, the Larry Davids, the Matt Damons, all the endorsements that came along with that, and then for it all to come crumbling down.
There's a good book, Going Infinite, Michael Lewis, and it's about the whole SBF debacle. Kind of like, so if anybody wants to kind of like have a little bit more of an insight on how a sociopath's mind works, it's kind of interesting.
So I wanted to go back before Web3. What were you doing in the tech world?
I started my career in finance, actually. So I've
Okay.
worked in Brazil with the former central bank president, Arminio, and was a trader, buy side always. Was an equity analyst and kind of like always had a thing for companies. But I looked at commodities at the time, and I was reading Mark Rich's bio, King of Oil, and I thought that there were so many similarities between how the creative economies operated and how the oil market in the 60s operated at the time. And so that was kind of like what interested me into starting my first company, which was an art licensing business that, our objective was to bring more access and to make the creative economy more democratic.
And so did you study finance or tech in college?
Economics.
Economics? And
Yeah.
how has that been beneficial to like you taking on a world in the tech entrepreneurship?
So essentially what we do is we gamify everything. And in economics, my area that I was most interested in was behavioral economics, which is exactly what I do.
Gotcha.
But with economics degree and obviously being a CEO, you must have come across a lot of case studies, whether that be research or it sounds like you do a lot of reading. How do maybe some of your past readings or research play a role into your current role as CEO?
I think reading is everything, right? Reading is a forum for us to kind of like progress historical moments and lessons across time. And I read one or two books a month, but it
Wow.
really depends. It could be, sometimes you're inspired by things that aren't really related, right? Like if you read like The Creative Act, like, that's supposed to be a creativity book, but it could apply to kind of like any founder and any entrepreneur, because at the end of the day, we are creators and we are co-creators.
And I like how you mentioned you read. So our audience here on the Everything But Politics podcast is definitely younger, 20s, 30s, young 30s, college kids. And as you know, attention span is a topic of conversation a lot nowadays. What advice?
TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. What advice would you give to some of these younger people listening about, lengthening their attention span and getting into a book and just reading and gaining that knowledge?
Audible really helps me. It's so hard for you to actually be able to like sit down and open up a book because we're all so busy all the time doing so many different things. But like, I have a sauna at my house, which I go in almost every day. So like
Awesome.
listening to something on Audible for an hour, like you get through an hour a day, and that at the end of the week, that's 7 hours. You can probably get through a book a week if you really wanted to, or even you're driving or you're commuting and you can be listening to that. Like try to, do activities that are enriching and not like derogatory to your self-esteem, because social media can be like extremely addicting, but at the same time it can also be very hard to cope, especially if someone is a little more isolated, has less friends, etc., and they're seeing this world around them. Meanwhile, a good book, a good lesson can teach you so much about yourself and can teach you so much about kind of like personal growth, and that will kind of like put you miles ahead of a lot of people.
Well, and it's impressive because obviously you mentioned the reading. You just mentioned you like to sauna. Obviously, too, as a CEO, you're extremely busy. How are you managing your time with all the stress and people that rely on you?
I think mindfulness really changed my entire kind of like experience. At the beginning of 2023, I had a small stroke in my eye because of stress. And I knew that I needed to kind of like figure out a way that, I could continue to run the company, go through the stress because it happens, it's inevitable. There are months that you can't pay people because your clients are late or because your investors haven't sent the money. And you have to figure out a way to kind of like keep it together because you're the, person that is like leading and keeping the morale and all of that, and meditation and kind of like finding that kind of like grounding force not only opens open space in your mind for you to think clearly and make better decisions, but also when you're operating from a place of calm, it's just a better human experience, right? And
Yeah,
you attract
totally.
better things because your energy is higher. And there's a friend of mine said something the other day, which was great. Relax and attract instead of chasing.
Good, that's a good one. So something I read about you is that you had a paradigm shift, if you will, after attending Burning Man. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it's funny because like now I've been to so many burns and I've gone so much deeper in terms of mindfulness. And like sometimes when people ask me that question, I'm like, Burning Man is mindfulness for dummies, because it shows like, humans, that the flow state is possible and that we can collaborate and that we can co-build things. And that when we are in that state, once again, we attract wonderful things. We do impossible things. We run into the people that we exactly want to run into, or the people that we have to run into. You manifest an ice cream in the middle of the desert, and like you can bring that into your life. And I think that's kind of like stage 2, right? Or stage 3, which is also very similar to kind of like the different stages of enlightenment when you think of Burning Man, or when you think of mindfulness. Stage 1 is, maybe you go into a super quiet space or a beautiful landscape and you focus on your breath, or you listen to a guided meditation and you're able to get to that place, like Satori, whatever you want to call it. But like that's just a very early stage of mindfulness. Like what is real enlightenment is actually integrating that into your everyday life and being able to, maintain that same calm, maintain that same peace of mind, regardless of what is thrown at you. And so, think it's the same thing there. Learn your lesson from kind of like, an experience, which could be Burning Man, it could be something else, but collaborating within community and entering that flow state, and then integrate that into, the moments that you need it the most.
And do you have like a daily routine to make sure that you do mindfulness every day?
Yeah, I meditate pretty much every day. Like and it doesn't necessarily have to be in the morning. It's when you have time for it.
And
Yeah,
for
I
our
feel like
listeners, go ahead.
I feel a misconception about meditation is that like people feel like you gotta like be crisscross applesauce, have your hands in the air. Like, do you have any like set way of doing it, or just kind of like sit down and close your eyes, however you feel appropriate?
I like to sit in lotus because I don't know, it just helps, but like you can do whatever you want with your hands. You can also like there's meditations that you just lay down. So it really is kind of like whatever works for you. Whatever works for you in terms of kind of like as well. Some people are really good to like just listening to your breath and going into a meditative state. That doesn't work for me. I need guided meditation. I need like to kind of like it's weird to, listen to something. And so my spiritual advisor actually said something to me which made a lot of sense. Listen to everything, try to learn like, as much as you can, and then do whatever works for you.
And what kind of guided meditation do you listen to for maybe one of our listeners who wants to get started?
Ram Dass is awesome. Alan Watts is the man in terms of kind of like even just the readings. Um, More kind of like New Age, Joe Dispenza, which is a little bit of a more hands-on method, right? Which is
Mhm.
Joe's method is about going from a place of time space where you're just kind of like reacting and actually taking control of your manifestation and putting yourself through a vision of the future in a level of energy and a high vibration so that you can attract these miracles basically.
Nice. Uh, and boss, something I want to do now is I want to go back to your professionally life as a CEO and kind of what that's been like for you since launching this startup. Is it everything you thought it was going to be? Is it more? Is it less? Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Mhm. It's a lot more. I feel like people ask me all the time, like, oh, should I start a company? I was like, you should start a company if you absolutely have to. If you can't, not, because that idea needs to kind of like live in the world. But you shouldn't start a company because you want to be a founder, because it's like a really hard job. It's super lonely at the top. It's not a joke. You're always kind of like the person that is paid less last because you have to prioritize everyone else. But you're also the person that shoulders all the responsibility and finding all the funds. So, it's a beautiful roller coaster ride And, the highs are really high. Like when you do close something like, we signed with the NFL Players Association a couple like last week. So that was a
Awesome.
big win,
Amazing.
obviously, but and that's kind of like one of those like amazing moments, that you're like, oh, I can't believe I did that. But then, like, maybe a week later, you could have, as I said, a client that is late to pay you, an investor that doesn't send the money, and you're fully delayed, and your entire staff is counting on you, and it's all on you to kind of like resolve that. And that's kind of like on a monthly or a weekly basis. It's really, really nonstop. It's not a stable life. Like people think that the founder life is really cool and that, you get to like have all this flexibility, do all of these things, which you can, yes, but it also means that you work 24 hours a day, regardless of where you are in the world.
Totally. And with congrats on the deal with NFLPA. That's amazing. But
Thank you.
with other clients that maybe aren't as, obviously known or really any client in general, how do you like maintain or even go about managing your client portfolio?
We have a team, so people are delegated to different clients, and there's different needs that come into play, and it's just like it just happens. We use a CRM system called HubSpot, which really helps as well, so that we know
Yep.
kind of like all of the different conversations that people in the team have had with the different uh clients, and we have a super organized client pipeline so that we know what to do next. But it's whatever works for you, right? As long as you have a system and that people are following the system and that the clients are kind of like not feeling abandoned, because if they feel abandoned, they will leave you. It works.
And how
Well,
many
and
people do
as
you?
CEO, who's the one really maintaining these relationships with the clients? Are there people that give a sales team? Is it an executive team? Who's doing that kind of work?
It's mostly the CEO, like especially the bigger clients. They don't want to speak like, you can, my team is very, very helpful in terms of generating materials, in terms of kind of like providing support, etc. But at the end of the day, like every now and then you do have to show face, and you do kind of like have to talk to your clients and understand more strategically where it is that they want to go.
And how many people do you work with on your team?
We're 20.
And prior to this company, did you ever start another company that didn't work out, or was this your first one?
Yeah, so within this company, like there we have had a previous platform that was an art company that still exists and is in the process of actually being licensed out. And we are starting another company now, which is a sponsorship dual-sided marketplace where we're fractionalizing sponsorship opportunities and tokenizing them. So this is 3 companies now.
And you're
Awesome.
going to be the CEO of all 3 of them? Or will
I
you?
haven't decided what we're gonna do with the sponsorship one and the art company. We are very happy to kind of like start licensing it out so that we can have new management, because it's really not the priority right now.
Cool. I want to ask you another question regarding this is a little more fun. This is a little more fun, not as serious. What does the word disruption mean to you?
Disruption means to change a system.
And was that the goal when you created this?
Um, well, it was very different, right? Because when we created this, there was no such thing as blockchain. So it wasn't just changing a system, but it was creating a new one from scratch.
Well, and as all these other companies emerge, how do you stay ahead of that curve and kind of have a leg up?
I think the first thing is don't think about competition. It's such a new market and it's such a new technology that there's going to be space for everyone. And for us, it's less about standing out and more about striking really important partnerships that are going to set up massive network effects in the future.
Right. And for any entrepreneurs listening, I feel like because we do a lot of outreach for, for really everything. When you started, tell us, what was that? Became a salesperson essentially doing outreach of these partnerships. Would you do that through cold calling, cold email, LinkedIn message? How did you go about outreach?
All of the above. But I'd say LinkedIn was one of the most important tools for us at the beginning. Like of the bulk of our first clients and first investors came from a bot that I used to have that ran on LinkedIn, that kind of like I used to target it to different industries and make it craft different little messages. but obviously you have to babysit the bot. But then when your network gets bigger, it gets much easier for you to request warm intros from investors, friends, etc. And that's definitely an easier way to go, because if you come in through kind of like a validated intro, then it's much easier for people to actually get back to you.
And in terms of networking now, and maybe even then too, were you big on going to, conferences and events and traveling around the country?
Yeah, we still do it. I'd say I'm much more selective now with my time because there's just less of it. And we do so many events. So, I obviously we have to prioritize the events that we're present in. I don't go to conferences anymore unless there's a speaker role attached to it, and it's just kind of like a time thing. But yeah, in 2022, I essentially went basically on a roadshow. We spoke at every single conference. We spoke at TechCrunch. We spoke at like a whole bunch of different, uh, you know, conferences to get the word out and then create these relationships.
And what was the biggest event that you spoke in front of?
I don't know. It's a tough one. There were so many big ones. Like Web3 Expo was really big at the Win in Vegas. TechCrunch was obviously big. We've had a lot of success in public appearances.
And from your
I'd say
first,
the one that is missing is TEDx. So that's kind of
okay,
like probably for this year.
yeah, okay, nice. And from your first public speaking event to now, how has your public speaking
Oh,
improved?
completely different. Like I remember my first demo day. It was a disaster. Like a literal disaster. People could not understand what I was talking about. So it's like it's a habit and it's practice like anything else. Like we've done so many different TV shows and like so many different things over the years, and you especially as you kind of like understand more what it is that you want to do and the mark that you want to leave on this planet, it becomes much easier.
And what kind of advice would you give to someone looking to join the Web3 entrepreneur world right now?
Join it. It's the future. Find an avenue that really interests you and either, get onto a startup that is already building something so that you can learn from people that are already building, or, if you feel like the infrastructure is missing, and you have the tools to build it, go for it.
And aside from like your company, what are some other companies in the Web3 that you kind of look up to and think they've got a good future ahead?
Coinbase for sure. I think that's kind of like the staple. Circle, what they did with USDC as payments and stablecoin. Um, MoonPay, a lot of the blockchains themselves. There's a lot of good stuff being built.
So the future's in good hands.
Future is in good hands.
Nice. But something I've noticed about obviously you're all in on Web3 and this next generation of how people, really do things. When you're talking to traditionalists and people that really are anti, don't want to invest, don't want anything to do with it. Not that you're trying to sell them, but if you were, what would you say to them?
Um, I don't try to sell people, so
Yeah.
if they're not interested, it's not for them,
Yeah.
and it's their loss. They're gonna lose basically an opportunity to, access the new world infrastructure and a essential shift in back end. And that's a choice.
And how do you like kind of see it playing out in the future? Like if I go on my phone right now, like you can go to Google and that's what considered like Web 2. Like how would like someone be using Web 3 on a day-to-day basis?
So all of our systems are fully kind of like high tech, right? So
Mm.
if you interact with any alpha brand, you can scan a QR code on the side and drop your email or your phone number. We'll create a custodial wallet for you without you even knowing it, and you start grabbing points. So super simple, and everyone can do it on a daily basis, or even just like creating a subscription with one of your favorite companies and starting to earn points. So they're going to be interactions just like the ones that we're familiar with Web2, but the tech is just hidden in the best UX.
Well, and how long do you think it will be until like people are, using Web 3 to purchase their homes?
That one is going to be more of like a state by state play. We're very interested in the tokenization of real estate and we've
Mhm.
looked into it a lot, but it's and especially when it comes to escrow, I think that's a big problem and it's a very expensive problem. So it's an easy one to solve, but it really is state by state, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, law by law. So it's going to take a little bit longer.
So interesting. It just the
Yeah.
whole thing and how quickly it's evolved. I mean, really since COVID, I feel like is the point where even like your grandparents know about it now. It's not just like it's not a little
Well,
thing anymore.
this year is going to be a big one. Things are going to be much more in people's faces.
And
You're saying it from a mainstream level?
Yeah, from a mainstream adoption level.
Okay.
do you have
Yeah,
any
we're,
like
we're excited to see it.
examples on maybe what's to come this year?
As I said, a lot on the fan engagement front. Most of the major sports events will already be on the blockchain in different ways. Most of the major sports leagues, teams, beverage companies, like you name it.
So
Nice.
when you say like a sports team's going to be using it, how would the user know that like it's Web3? Like what would
He wouldn't unless he wanted to.
gotcha?
But it's so integrated you don't even think about it.
Exactly. Most of
Okay.
them are not even going to care about it.
Yeah, just will be involved in their everyday life.
They just want cool things, perks, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
commemorations that they can hold on to.
But Manuel, we covered so much here, and I just want to simplify it for our listeners in the best possible way about what alpha like just like a sentence on what you guys do. So correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially you guys are a consultant that helps companies intersect to blockchain technology. Is that
No, we're an enterprise SaaS solution.
okay?
So like Salesforce that
Yes,
allows for brands to build their own first party data sets and gamify them.
gotcha. And with obviously like a lot of people won't understand what that means. I mean, obviously it's your world. It's a different world for a lot of our listeners. Um, I guess with that being said, how do you explain that to people that have no idea?
We're changing the way the companies do customer loyalty to build a better experience for the clients,
Okay,
allowing them to have we're airline points for everything in your life.
cool. And why the Salesforce example? Why HubSpot is obviously very similar. Why do you say Salesforce?
Because Salesforce is a enterprise SaaS CRM solution. So in terms of kind of like what it is that we do, we're an enterprise SaaS customer relationship management platform as well, just operating in a different way.
And going forward into not just this year, but let's say 5, 10 years, what do you have any like big goals that you have written on a whiteboard that are, like are main things you want to hit in the next 5 to 10 years for your company?
Yeah, for sure. Hundreds of millions of users. That's kind of like happening faster than we imagined. I like to say that in the next 5 to 10 years, 1 in 10 people will have interacted with one of our QR codes without even knowing it.
Yeah, it's a bit. It is. We love talking to entrepreneurs like yourself, and especially when you get to like. Obviously, it takes a lot of work, but hearing the grand scale vision, it's really encouraging, and we're really excited to see what you do. And well, thank you so much for coming on our show. We learned a lot the last 40 minutes.
Thanks for having me, guys. And just in time for my computer battery to not die.
That's perfect. Well, enjoy
Guys.
the rest of your trip, and look forward to seeing what you guys accomplish. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thanks,
Yeah.
guys. Have a good one.